Welcome to the Comic Binge. I am your host, Paul Herman, and today we continue our journey to Superman, the movie, or Superman DC Studios Superman movie? I don't know. Whatever the case is, we here at the Comic Binge are doing a 12-month-long lead-up of telling some of the, or not telling, but going over some of the more important or very focused Superman stories that people may want to jump into and prep themselves and prime themselves ready for the upcoming movie. So we have we're going to go over last month's episode. We'll go over this month's episode here in a second. But before you do all that, please do us all a favor, a giant favor, and go subscribe to the Comic Binge. It only makes, all the sense in the world. And when I say sense, I mean spider sense. So yes, today we are talking about Alan Moore. Yes, the Alan Moore writing Superman comic books. And what does that all mean? And why do we pick that in the first place? So we'll go into all that here in a second. We have kind of a unique show today. We have right now me, your host, Paul Herman. And with me is one of the four people who are not, two of them are not here yet, but we have Adam. Adam, how are we doing today, sir?
Hi. Not bad. Pretty good.
Pizza Time, aka Pizza Time, Adam. And you were on our show last month. We were talking about the Panic in the Sky, which was chosen by Chris and Javi because they're the biggest Superman fans of the group, and because we had to start early, they aren't quite here yet, but they will be here soon. But they chose Panic in the Sky last month, and that was interesting. That was a little more convoluted than I'd say most of these, issues are. I would say as convoluted meaning there's a lot of just preamble. You have to kind of know what's going on a little bit, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And we both liked Panic in the Sky okay last month. It wasn't our favorite, but it wasn't terrible. It was all right. It was a fun crossover. Wouldn't you say so?
Yeah, it was it was fun.
Okay. So what I wanted to do was one of the stories we talked about. We have a laundry list of Superman comics and storylines we're going to go over. And this one I thought was important to bring up, which is, I say this one, I'm talking about the Alan Moore comic books. So it's not just, it's kind of a single story, but we'll get into that here in a second. But we're talking about whatever happened to the Man of Tomorrow, which is the two comic book storyline that was written right before Crisis on Infinite Earths, which retconned or not retconned, but it rebooted, I should say. Rebooted the whole DC universe. And so with that, there is a trade, well, I have the other comic here. It is a trade paperback, which collects a couple different things in here as well. So this is the trade where we are reviewing. This is called officially Whatever Happened to Man of Tomorrow, the deluxe edition. This is going to have the Superman comic books, this 2-issue storyline that's going to be we'll be covering, but it also has DC Presents 85 and Superman Annual number 11, which is all written by Alan Moore. And we're going to cover all four of those comic books. But the main gist is these first two issues of Whatever Happened to the Man of Tomorrow, which is Superman. Well, I'll throw the comic up here. We'll see if I can read it from here. Is it 430? Let me read here.
423.
423. In Action Comics, 583.
84, I think.
It says 583. It says 423, 583.
Let me see.
And then it says DC Comics Presents 85. It's Superman Annual 11. So we'll be covering these comics here momentarily. So I wanted to cover this because of a couple of reasons. Okay. The main one is honestly because of the elephant in the room, if you will. It's Alan Moore. Okay. That's why I wanted to cover this, because for those who don't know, Alan Moore is a very polarizing figure in comic books. He's written some of the best comic books maybe ever written. He also hates comic books now, basically. He hates the medium. But there's legitimate reasons why it's not the show right now for that per se. But Alan Moore wrote, the Superman comic books that came out right before, the Crisis on Infinite Earths, and he's, very much regarded as one of the best writers in comic books ever. So I had never read this series or these comic books, and I really wanted to do that for this show, and to get, for people who are going into Superman the movie, I thought this would be a great idea to kind of go over and talk about and review, because it's Alan Moore and he wrote Superman, and it's kind of, I wouldn't say forgotten, but I would say it's kind of overlooked. It feels like for comic book fans. Adam, tell me your history with Alan Moore in general, and then also just kind of your knowledge of the story of him writing Superman at all.
I don't really have much of a history besides, I guess, his recent comments, which I don't, want to demonize him for those recent comments, because I feel like he actually has a point that, people aren't taking into consideration. They just kind of, they broad stroke it as like, oh, he hates the medium, but I feel like his criticisms are valid, with the way modern comic books are going, honestly. But regardless, I've heard of this. I think I saw this issue in my shop a few months ago. It must have been, and I was like, oh, I think I'll check it out. I kind of started reading it, but I stopped because I was like, I'll save this for later, like, because it was late night, and I was like, oh, I was just kind of like skimming through it a little bit. I was like, oh, this is very interesting.
Yeah,
but I was like, oh, I'm gonna, yeah, like the beginning, it hooks you in like immediately with the villains and all that. But I was like, oh, I'll save this though for later. And then just so happens that you're like, oh, we're gonna do this for the show, so it's like, there we go.
Really? Oh wow! So like this is all before I even asked you to be on the show.
Yeah.
Wow,
that's just a while ago. It's funny. I was just kind of like, oh, okay. Like, I was like, okay, now it's time to read it fully and see what it's all about.
Right. Interesting. Okay. Well, we got someone coming on the show finally. The Hovster himself, Javi El Corazon, the heart.
There was a cat in a tree, and it required my attention.
Oh.
But it's out now. Everything's good. Although I think some child abuse happened after the fact.
Wow.
God.
Wow. We're going
Andrew.
full throttle right into it. We're going right into it. Javi ain't holding back. He's like I'm going.
Yeah.
In.
What have you seen? You've seen Superman the movie? I'm assuming, right?
Yeah, I'd see Superman.
Yeah, like he saves the cat and gives it to the girl, and the girl's like, "Mommy, this man flew in and got Frisky out of the tree," or something like that. And she's like, "What did I tell you about telling lies?" And you hear her like smacking the kid. It's like Superman's flying off. It's like, bro,
I kind of forgot. I forgot that she abused. Yeah. Okay.
Could you not hear that this child got wit? All you had to do was fly around and turn around and be like, "Ma'am, she's not lying." Yeah.
That was the Zack Snyder, unnecessary violence and all that stuff. Right. Where people are like, "Why Superman wouldn't do that?" So Anyway, but for people who are coming in, appreciate everyone. I'm hearing a feedback from someone. I'm not sure if it's me or what's going down. Just heads up. I'm not sure who it is. Anyway. As I keep explaining here, we've got Javi. Basically, I've just been talking about this, a little bit of history of this comic book series, how the two issues that were that are the main focus of the story, I would say. Whatever happened to the Man of Tomorrow. This came out right before Crisis on Infinite Earths. I know Chris probably has maybe some more to say about this, but what do you tell me? You're a big Superman fan as much as Chris. So my question is, where was this purposely done? Like, did like Alan Moore have carte blanche to do what he wanted before, like kind of like, oh, Alan, do what you want, like, or tell me, do you know anything about this?
I don't necessarily know if it was carte blanche, but like they knew it was coming. They wanted something, like they were trying to figure out what to do for these issues before the relaunch, before Byrne came in. And it occurred to, I want to say Julie Schwartz in the middle of the night, like to have them do, like to treat these issues like they were the last Superman comics. Okay. Since basically the continuity was going away. So I guess basically they gave him carte blanche. I mean, they could have said no about some things. I'm not really sure. But, and then because of that, like they wanted like Kurt Swan and Murphy Anderson to do some of the work, but then, or no. I take that back. It was, they wanted Jerry Siegel to write it. That was the initial idea because Siegel obviously co-created Superman, wrote the first story. They wanted him to come back and write the second. But then like things couldn't get worked out in time for that to happen for various reasons, I guess. And then they went to Alan Moore or Alan Moore. I think it says in the intro for the deluxe edition, which is reprinting an issue or an intro from a prior version that, he's like, I would have killed you if you didn't offer it to me, kind of thing. Like I would have strangled you with these hands if you didn't give me the issues to write, something like that.
And then he's gone back and said, "That's all rubbish. That's all. I was lying."
Probably.
So yeah, probably. But yeah, Alan Moore, very interesting. Really quickly, I want to throw it to Adam real quick, and I'll throw it back to you in a second, Javi. How much Alan Moore work have you read, Adam?
Trying to think. I haven't really read anything. I have Watchmen, but I still haven't read that.
You haven't read Watchmen?
No.
Boy, you crazy.
I'm interested in the Swamp Thing though, too. I'm interested in that.
Well, Adam, let me interrupt you really quick and say that when I read Watchmen the first time, it was very not mediocre, but it was just like, okay, that was a comic that was a big deal to people, I guess. And I've read it now, and it doesn't help the fact that I knew the ending going into it.
Yeah. I mean,
thanks Wizard Magazine for ruining that. But when I went back and revisited it later is when I'm like, oh wow, this is really fascinating how the layers work. And like the first time I think it was like it was hyped so much, so I was like, oh okay, that was good, I guess. It was the second read through, I'm like, oh wow, no, this book is gotcha, like I get it now. So whenever that time comes, if it doesn't click with you the first time, give it some time, then revisit it later and see if it plays any better for you.
Excellent. Okay. So you haven't read much then, it sounds like, Adam.
No, not
from Alan. Okay.
No.
I just kind of give people an idea for me. When I was growing up reading comics, Alan Moore was kind of a weird figure for me because I read mostly Marvel, and I only heard about, Watchmen from Wizard Magazine, and very much like it's the best. And, I heard about, his Swamp Thing, which I heard was, just because he felt like something that I wasn't ready for yet. And when I got out of comics and I came back when I, in my early 20s, I started getting into the graphic novel format. I was a floppy guy forever. And then I kind of started discovering I can get back at, I can get back into comics, through trades. And I remember I got kind of excited about the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen for some reason. And I remember,
Was it the movie?
Yeah, it was a movie for sure. And I remember like being like, because I was really stoked that like these comic movies were being made, right?
Yeah.
And so I remember going into I remember, I think it was a Walden Books because it's still there.
Yeah.
Or B Dalton's, one of those things. It's one of those things. I
Miss
went
Walden
in there.
Books.
A word. I went in there and they had the Alan Moore section like in like a display, and it had Watchmen, and then it had League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. And I was like, I got some money. I'm just gonna buy these. I was in my early 20s. And I always wanted to read Watchmen, and I burned through Watchmen. I burned through that. I loved it because I hadn't been reading superhero comics in a long time, and I got super into it. I loved League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, despite its like ridiculousness. And Alan Moore quickly became like, I'm like, this guy rules. And I loved it. And as I got older and read, Watchmen's still one of my favorite comics of all time. And I love Miracle Man. Miracle Man's one of my favorites. Alan Moore. Alan Moore's, I've read a good chunk of Swamp Thing. Alan Moore. But Alan Moore's kind of a dick, to be quite honest. He kind of sucks as a person. I'm just going to say it. He does. And, he has a reason to be mad about certain things, but I'm not going to lie. He's a damn good writer. So, so reading these Superman comics for the Superman, the Superman movie that's coming out here in a number of months here, half a year, it was really important for me to get into this at some point. And I know he had written very limited Superman comics, which we all have in this trade, the deluxe edition, What Happened to Man Tomorrow, for Superman comics to be precise. I was really excited to get into it. So Javi, what's your, you told us about Watchmen. What's your kind of Alan Moore besides that? Like, have you read anything else besides Watchmen?
Well, the first thing would be The Killing Joke.
I forgot. I've read that. I forgot, dude. I forgot. I read that. Yeah.
Yeah, and then probably Watchmen was next. I've flirted with V for Vendetta. I keep saying I'm going to read it every November 5th, and I've had the trade for like 17 years and haven't finished
Me too,
it.
probably.
So there's that. I've read some of From Hell. And
From Hell's brilliant. From Hell is brilliant. It's
covered on the show.
It's crazy.
Yeah. Some of his Swamp
My wife
Thing
and I love that.
Some of his Swamp Thing and obviously these comics and League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, which I read because the movie was coming out. I'm like, oh, this sounds like
Same.
a cool, like, it's the Avengers of literary characters. And I read it and I really liked the first volume, and then saw the movie.
It goes off the rails, I heard.
Why Sean Connery would you do this? and he was like, yeah, you're right. Why did I do this? I'm done. He quit after that. Like,
damn.
That he's like, I'm sick of this, and retired after that. And he did like a voice work for like something called like Sir Sean or Sir Billy or something, like some CGI cartoon. And like that was it. Like, and it was like for charity. But after that was his last live action was League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, that he had such a bad time on that he quit acting.
Well, I heard he was awful to work with too. Would be real. And the person who directed the movie quit directing. I think left the business altogether.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, so
it was the guy who did the first Blade.
Oh, really? So yeah. The thing is that Alan Moore's work he's very brilliant, but there's one thing I can, as an Alan Moore fan and someone who doesn't like him personally as a person, it seems like I can at least say this. Alan Moore writes a very particular story, and the first thing kind of getting out yeah, but just how he plays things and like surprises you and tries to reimagine things, which is kind of where he likes to go into, but still keeping the essence of what makes the characters.
Sure.
It's all in these two. It's all in these two issues, right?
Yeah.
And Javi, I'm gonna let you kind of, if you could throw up the pages, you got a ton. I want to show everything, obviously, but can you find a page with Luthor and Brainiac? I think I brought it at least. One of the things I want to say really, really quick about this is that
these are good Halloween comics, everybody.
These are good Halloween comics. The one thing I'm going to say I thought was interesting and I liked about what he did here was, yes, he's kind of saying it's kind of the last, if these were the last two issues, this is what, you'd want to do. I thought he did a good job of incorporating creatively everything, which I thought was a positive. I will say off the bat, I want to I won't be here all night because I'll probably jump off before you guys are done. When Chris eventually gets here, we'll tag team out potentially. One thing I want to say right now, God, it's awesome. I don't love these two issues. I like them.
Yeah.
I don't love them.
Sure.
There's parts I love. Adam, go ahead.
No, I agree. I don't, I think it's very interesting, engrossing. As a final Superman story, sure, makes sense. Like you said, there's the deconstruction element, like, because everyone goes nuts. So it's like, okay, it's like, what if, the squeaky clean Superman world becomes the Watchmen world a little bit? A little bit. It's like proto that, Yeah. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. As an ending, I would say it's fine. I like it. I do. I mean, I say all these comics are good Halloween comics because there's a lot of horror in them, especially with Brainiac and Lex Luthor. And then the stuff.
If I may say, I thought this was truly inspired. I thought this is a pretty genius idea for what Alan Moore did here. I thought personally,
it's terrifying.
Yeah, Javi, what as a Superman, I know you feel a certain way about this series, but I want to ask you before you get into your
badass,
thoughts. Crypto was amazing, dude. What did you think of the Brainiac? Like that created like that kind of. I thought it was truly inspired. I'm curious.
The Brainiac Luthor team.
Yeah, exactly. Team up.
I just like how they refer to it as that. Yeah. Like that sounds kind of, I don't know, like an antiquated thing that just stuck, I guess. I don't know.
Right. Yeah.
Because it's like the new Brainiac Luthor team. It's like this was a thing, and it just like this is a thing from the 50s that just kind of. I don't know.
It's like on Scooby-Doo or like the old Batman animated show where like Penguin and Joker would always be seen together doing stuff.
Yeah.
But now they more takes it and like with a dark twist and it's while they're teaming up, it's not an equal partnership, let's say. So it's really more of Brainiac using Luthor to some horrific results.
Yeah.
So did you think that was a pretty cool, like neat idea, or was that kind of like, okay, I'm just curious your thoughts as a big Superman fan?
I mean, the idea of having them combine forces is cool. Like we've seen them interact in other mediums, but it's just the whole thing, man, is just. I bought this. I don't know. A trade like late 90s maybe, and it's never been a favorite of mine. It's not even on like my bookshelf right now. It's in somewhere else because I don't access it. I'm like let me just go put it somewhere where I don't need to grab it easily because I don't put a lot of fingers on it. It's, I don't know, man. It's really cynical and
It is cynical. It is very cynical.
With Jimmy and Lana, yeah.
Yeah, I can see why it had its impact, because you're taking these like squeaky clean versions of these characters and you're doing horrible things with it. It's like Alan Moore got the keys to the toy chest, took every toy out, and then it's like, I'm going to break all these toys because no one else is ever going to play with them again. And it just feels mean spirited. The fact that he basically kills every single person except for 4 people.
Yeah.
Is I don't think that necessarily is like, oh, this makes it a classic because look how edgy Superman got. And like, it just doesn't seem, it's not fun. Like, he took the fun concepts of, you know, like, well, here's Bizarro and here's the prankster and you know, whoever, and Mixel Spitlick, and let's make the most darkest adult versions that we can possibly make with these characters.
Now that's not. Yeah, I was saying that wasn't. We'll get to that one later.
And it's not. It doesn't feel good to me to read this story.
Javi, really quick, I want to comment about this person down here. I can't read their name very well. I apologize in advance.
Ishan One.
Yeah, thank you. Ishan One. I'm aware. I'm sure they teamed up periodically, but with the mechanical head on top of Luthor, I think that was a first time. If I could be wrong, I assume that was it because it seemed like a pretty big moment. Am I wrong on this? Holler at me in the comment. Yeah. So that was the first time that happened. Correct.
As far as I can remember, yeah, and it's like that's a cool idea.
Mm-hmm.
Other than the fact that it goes horribly, horrifically wrong,
right?
You know,
I do, but I kind of like that though. I don't know.
Yeah,
I
Me too.
like
I
that
do too. Yeah.
Because like Luthor thinks like, oh, this
Yeah.
is gonna be in my favor, and Brainiac's like, nope.
Yeah, in that regard, like it's cool, and like on its own, like it's a great idea. But when you couple it up with basically the death of Clark Kent,
I kind of like that too.
The death of his friends.
I don't like that.
Yeah.
The death of Supergirl, the death of his dog.
Yeah, the dog.
Like
that was
it's way too much. The death
like
of
that,
a lot of his villains, like the fact that Bizarro goes on a rampage, just killing people and then commits suicide. like it's messed up. I don't know how many kids he scarred in 1986. I'm glad I wasn't reading Superman then.
I mean,
but hey.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Adam.
Yeah, I mean, it is a lot. I guess because it's bleak is the thing, but I feel like I think it is kind of cool. I think it's interesting that I do really just think it's interesting that like all the villains kind of realize like, oh, we can like this is a thing that's been done, I think, since this. But the idea like, oh, you know, we can why do we have the training wheels on, you know?
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Training wheels off and we can actually, you know, mess things up. And it's a novel idea. It's kind of a cool idea. But then it does get bleak when it's like, well, you know, my friends die and my dog dies, like Javi says, and Superman thinks that he's going to die. But I don't know, like as the final word, I feel like I don't know how to describe it. I guess as a final story, it's like, well, okay, well, we're making it so that the world doesn't need Superman anymore, I guess, technically.
Right.
So if you're going to kind of collapse the world, then I think everything basically gets wrapped up. It's bleak, but there is some of a happy ending.
Dude, Crypto
there's some things
this guy's throat out.
so rad.
And then yeah.
So
but I
did like
that.
Say,
I like that Crypto was like, he went down fighting.
Yeah, he was a force. Yeah. Here's the thing I'm going to say. I think you nailed something, Javi, that I think the biggest problem I have with this comic. I like this comic too. And Ishan one, I want to make this very clear. I can see why you love this story, because I don't think it's a bad story. It's actually, for 40 pages. It's pretty cool, like what he does. Now, the one thing that Javi talks about, I think that he's on the money on, is the fact that it's mean-spirited, and there's lots of weird sexual, not innuendos, but like tension with like Perry and his wife, which is like, again, it's just weird. It's weird to put that into like the story, but not only that, but you have like
Perry and his wife
like
are getting
Lana
a divorce.
Yeah, but then like Lana and like Jimmy are like getting in the bathtub naked. It's just like together. It's just weird. It's just it's if you take out this weird sexual overtones that he's doing, I think I like it a lot more. But then you have these, like you said, like everyone starts dying. It's like, well, we can't do this, but I think that's part of what I think he was trying to say was their world is literally ending.
Yeah.
And and this is where
we're gonna go all out.
Yeah, we're gonna go all out, but I think there is a overtone of just of like, what's the word I'm looking for? That feeling of not just, we're going all out and we can do whatever we want, but I think also the idea of like what happens when the world ends and Superman knows it, and what does that do with the character? And, just that whole idea, because in the ongoing comics, that doesn't really happen necessarily. Right. And so I think that he wanted to really tap into that, what would make that character feel and think and go through. And that's but again, the problem is when you do that, there should be a little bit more of a resolution with the character. And I don't think he really does that with Superman necessarily, in my opinion, but it's a little half-hearted, I think. So that's my main problem, I think, with this. I think otherwise, without those two glaring things, it's actually pretty cool. I don't love it. I don't like it. I will say Mitzelpick, whatever his name is, I thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah.
Like, and I wanted to ask you.
He's like, oh, I can do whatever I want.
I kind of thought that was interesting. Has anyone ever like gone into with what he did here with that character, with the whole like evil dark side?
He's usually more of a nuisance, than anything.
Right, but they show his true identity or his true self. Has anyone tapped back into this?
The fact that he has this like godlike power.
I mean, not really, no. Like, there's definitely been different visual interpretations.
Sure.
Once he was even that imp that the Fantastic Four fight, like Impossible Man, or like there's one instance where you find out that he's really that character in the 616. But nothing is malevolent as we get here, to my knowledge, in anything that I've read. Not really. So
yeah, no, it's interesting. I'm very intrigued by that, because it feels like that's a storyline waiting to be like no one's wanted to touch for whatever reasons.
No, maybe Morrison did do something in action with it, and that's what my brain is remembering. Because like this take on him feels very Morrisonian, like especially just having reread The Clown at midnight, like that. This feels like that iteration of like how Morrison explains the different personalities of the Joker. This feels like Moore's tapping into that, 2 decades prior. Nice shirt, Chris. But I can't think of anything as cynical as this. And like I said, these are all like cool ideas to me on their own. But when you lump it into one after the other, after the other,
True.
to
Yeah.
where you have, then Superman has to take a life. And he's like, well, I killed people, so I guess I'm not Superman anymore. I'm just going to retire and be stuck with, well, I love Lois, but, he's kind of throwing in the towel. And it's a weird way to go for like this iteration of the character. And then to have him be like, you want to see him have a happy ending, but it feels really weird to have like a happy ending with a wink after literally 90% of his supporting cast dies. And not in like pleasant ways. And with Lana getting powers and hearing how he doesn't want to hurt Lana, but he loves Lois so much and he can't tell either of them. And like, she knows that and then goes out to die for him. And he doesn't even get to appreciate that really or understand. And I don't know, but Chris is here. So
Chris, let me tee it up for you. So basically, if I'm not sure if you've listened to, okay, so he had another imp character that you're thinking of, Javi. That's what Isan One is saying. Thank you, Isan One. You're coming up big today, man. Couple things to tell you. It seemed like me and Adam liked the story enough. I'm not sure if you heard that. Javi, not as you can tell, not as big of a fan. We probably like it a little more than Javi. We talked about we like to team up with Brainiac and Lex Luthor. That was a really inspired idea. I just talked about Mental Pick. I like the idea of this monstrous version of him, and like that, I thought that was really a cool idea. I did talk about the weird Moorisms, where you have like the weird sexual overtones, which is I just like why, and then like just starts off and everybody and everything and. But besides those things, I like these comics. But I know you have mentioned this I want to say you like this quite a bit, but maybe I'm wrong. So tell me your history with the story as the person I know who loves, besides Javi, who loves Superman the most. What's your take on this story?
These were the first 2 back issues that I bought as a retailer.
Oh, wow.
I'd read the story before and I had wanted to collect it for a while, just because it's a pretty important signpost in terms of what would happen with Superman and the idea, at least the conceit of the story, in trying to serve as a send off to a generation, more than a generation of Superman stories. It's very important. I think the thing that whenever I revisit it, what I always have to remind myself is that this is a story from the mid 1980s, because I feel like it's imbued with it's something that more generally deserves a lot of credit for, is the maturation of the medium. And you wouldn't necessarily think that would be applied at this stage to a character like Superman, at least not until a few months later when John Byrne came along. But it absolutely was, for good or for ill, there is a lot of pathos here. And I would argue that, in comparison to some of the Superman stories that were published around that time, and certainly beforehand, that was a relative rarity, at least at this level. Not that writers didn't imbue Superman with pathos. It's just like a modern conception of pathos. It kind of goes back, Paul, to what you and I were talking about, was that a couple of months ago, about where the dividing line between the ages of different comics were. And we are still conceivably in the modern age that was summoned in by the likes of Watchmen and Dark Knight Returns in particular. But this is right there too, and it's easy to see that a lot of what Superman goes through over the course of this story, at least in the recounting of what he went through, was not commonplace for Superman storytelling at this time. Over the years, my perceptions of it have probably softened a bit. The first time I read it, I was so taken with the idea of that modern conception of pathos being applied to Superman it's appropriate that this story feels so elegiac, but despite the fact that it does feel that way, it also ends on an upswing. Now, I mean, you can debate the merits about whether or not the ending is earned, and I think there's certainly a conversation to be had there, which you guys have probably had already. Unfortunately, I had to miss it, but with a literal wink at the camera at the end. But at the end of the day, too, I mean, considering the territory that Moore was playing in, whether you want to talk about Watchmen or you want to talk about Swamp Thing in particular, the thing that ultimately keeps me enjoying it is has to do more with Moore himself than it does as like a signpost of the legacy of Superman, because this was a time in which Alan Moore saw value in these kinds of icons, which he doesn't anymore and probably never will again. He took the job seriously. I feel like this is a story that is dripping with a reverence for a classic kind of bygone superhero storytelling that Moore himself grew up reading. Um, and he treats Superman and his supporting cast with a level of respect that I'm unaccustomed to from modern Alan Moore uh, diatribes. Let's say. That being said, I mean, I do still enjoy this story, but I don't see it as like a definitive Superman story by any means. But I do think that it made important strides with him and his world that would probably play no small role in informing the perspectives of other creators in the years to come. Particularly, like Byrne, I think is easy to point to, and I think Byrne probably like saw this and was like, "Oh, yeah, cool." But I feel like it had more of an impact on Jurgens, Stern, Simonson, uh, because they treated Superman with a level of respect and reverence that I feel like it's informed by this, but they took it to a whole other level. And we talked before about the strength of the Superman line when that team came aboard in comparison to a lot of other characters that were in active publication at the time. This story could very well have played a role in that. I don't know if I mean, I'm sure like it's not hard to get the perspectives of these people. Like they're really well versed and thought out in the things that they say about what informs their own characterizations and perspectives on Superman and his supporting cast. But I feel like this was seen by them as maybe a signpost for the depth of character story that you could tell with Superman. So, in terms of like the specifics, this story gets Moorish, it's needlessly dark in a few places. I would have been very okay going my entire life without witnessing the death of Crypto. Like it would have been fine. But I'm very sensitive to that. Losing a pet at an early age, it does things to you. I think a lot of people can relate to that. Not okay with the ultimate end of Crypto, even though I think it does the character of Crypto some favors in terms of his willingness to sacrifice. But did we need that in a story that's already for like trying to think of contemporaneous readers of the time who maybe weren't okay with saying goodbye to this conception of Superman? Like that's kind of a gut punch, I would think. I don't think I've ever spoken to anybody that read this off the rack when it came out. But if you were a big Superman fan and you read this story, this must have been pretty disorienting for you. And I feel for those people, frankly. Even though, I have the benefit of coming in to the world at a time when Superman was being reinvented as a character in a positive direction. But there is something to be said about a story that has a mission of kind of burning it all down, but doing so
Yeah.
in a way that feels a little more reverent than maybe some people might expect. You want Superman to be treated well. You want his supporting cast to be treated well. And at the end of the day, I like where it leaves him with a sense of possibility with oh, okay, all right. I'll have to go back and review your contributions to the chat log there, Sean. But in the end, there are just some definite morisms here. I do think that in terms of like a straight Alan Moore superhero story, this one is kind of up there for me because it feels more classically superheroic than a lot of his other work does. And when like he doesn't, that might feel like a limitation for some creators, like staying within the guardrails of a classically superheroic story, but more shows like a musician play around the arpeggios and make it interesting. And he did that. And Kurt Swan just legitimizes this as a goodbye to a generation of Superman stories. I do think Neil Gaiman ended up doing this concept better with Batman.
I was gonna say,
but that doesn't diminish, I think, the power of this story, particularly in its time. Over time, that power is probably diminished. But in terms of Alan Moore's bibliography at DC Comics, for me, this is up there. Like, this isn't Watchmen, but it's not far behind it. And but the next story we'll talk about, that's higher for me.
So,
well, first, Chris, I just want you to know that Crypto is he's doing okay these days.
Hell yeah.
He's probably going to be getting a renaissance very, very soon instead of, going off into the sunset. And I wanted to comment on that, on the Batman version of this story that was Neil Gaiman.
Yep. And Andy Kubert.
End of RIP, but not even close to halfway through the Morrison run. And
are we going to do that on Nights Never Die? We might have to.
I think we should. I think we should.
Asked you if we were, and I think we should. I think it's
because Grant Morrison retroactively made it canon with his run, which I love. Anyway, I'm sorry, but that's a deviation. But
I think going into that story and hearing like we were going to get a different author and how I felt about whatever happened to the Man of Tomorrow, I wasn't looking forward to whatever happened to the Cape Crusader. But I feel like by the end of that second issue, like that is Gaiman very much has made a love letter to all the eras of Batman, or at least all eras of Batman at that point. Because that's 15 years ago now, at least. And so for me, like whatever happened to the Cape Crusader succeeds in a way where this falls short for me. But
okay. Well, one of the things I want to talk about before we move on here, and I have to jump off here in about 15 minutes. I know you guys will do it. We'll do it well. I think we can move on after this. Chris, I thought you did a beautiful job of explaining this comic as a hardcore Superman fan and someone I look up to for anything related to this character. I think that's a fair job what you said about the comic book. I think that it's interesting, and I think this to me as a whole is worthwhile for people getting into the character, because it's almost like a swan song for an era. Right. And I think I think that's important to kind of recognize that like there was this era of Superman that people look at and think it's not as strong or whatever. But Alan Moore found, I think for rightfully so, found value. And before we move on, I want to say, I think you're onto something. And Javi, can you find the Supreme comics I posted in there? One of the things that you have to remember is that when Alan Moore, left Marvel and DC and was like, I don't like this, Marvel DC stuff. He went to Image and worked, made some good money. And Rob Liefeld had no problem employing him, and obviously Jim Lee too. He did Wildcats. The thing is that Supreme is literally like a love letter to Superman. Like seriously, like. These comics are very well regarded, and it's literally like his love letter to Superman. And it's, I have the original story of the year. I read a little bit of it, and everyone says the same thing. It's basically just like him loving Superman. And I think look at Miracle Man is not necessarily it's more of a Shazam, but there's Superman elements there. There's a love there. And I think that's the thing about it, is that there is something special about these characters before he got jaded that you see, especially in Supreme, which is basically just Superman just with white hair. So it's interesting. So I think you nailed something there 100%. And maybe we need to read the Supreme stuff at some point to really go into that. We'll have to do it illegally, unfortunately, but there's just no other way to read these comics. They're just impossible to find. So moving on really quick, I want to,
jumping through to our back issue boxes and doing the work and getting the knee pads out and digging and getting them. Yeah. Right.
Knee pads. Well said. Well said. A couple things I want to say before I have to head out here in a little bit. I want to tackle this issue last because I have the least amount to talk about it. I think this cover is incredible, by the way. I think the story is really good, but we'll talk about this one last. Can we get to Annual 11 for me? Okay. After reading, this was, obviously only 4 comic books, right? Whatever Happened to Man of Tomorrow. And I read the first 2 issues. I liked them. Thought they were fine. I already talked about those here previously. This comic right here, yeah, Supreme. Yeah, I read a little bit. I loved it. Yeah, I got the second trade I got super cheap. The first trade I had to wait it out, but it's beat to hell library edition, so it's not looking great. Let's say the least. But Annual 11. Javi, yeah, thank you. I love this comic. I absolutely thought this comic was fantastic. I think Superman Annual 11 might be one of my favorite Superman comics ever written. And the reason why is because you have, I think, what makes Superman a strong character as, him as a character. I think you see him, lose a little control a little bit, not out of, not lose control, but get mad and not just be the goody two shoes Boy Scout.
Mm-hmm.
And within reason, without him being a different character, right? Again, I love this panel. And you get to see him, I love this page. This is Dave Gibbons is the one who drew this with, obviously this is a Watchmen re-team up or whatever. This comic, just the storytelling is chef's kiss. Freaking love it. And there's something about this, when he says burn to Mongol. It's just it's so beautifully set up with everything. I just love it. It's a great comic, and it shows you, to me, what makes Superman special with the DC universe, and what is, just kind of what, makes him Superman. And even though he could, trapped in this weird Kryptonian world, he's still that good natured thing of, defying his father. That's Superman, because Superman will go through, he will defy everything for the right reasons, right? And that's what makes him special. Because, think about Superman, he loves, the world, Earth, right? It's his protector. America at this point was, truth, justice, and the American way, right? That's Superman. Well, this, Jor-El here, this inner version of Jor-El, it is literally what I think embodies everything that makes Superman Superman, and he's willing to defy it for the greater good, no matter what. And that to me is Superman. And he will defy even something that he loves so much, like his own father, in this weird thing. And that's why that crazy thing that Mongol gives him, he's able to overcome, is with that. I think it's brilliant. This to me is is an essential Superman comic to me to read. Yeah, go ahead. I'll throw out everybody else. I absolutely just love this comic book. Anybody else?
Javi, we can't hear you.
I want to poke a
can't hear you,
hole in
Javi.
that before you leave.
All right.
Well, the second half of this, like the fight and Superman, like the rage that he gets, the justified rage towards Mongol, like as a Superman, you don't get to see that often. This is where the story falls short for me. And granted, I'll be upfront, like my sensibilities are post Crisis on Infinite Earths, right? Clark is who he is. Superman is what he can do. This is not that version of Superman. I can totally read this and understand it from that perspective. If this is a different take on Superman, it's not my preferred version. But when you get Mongol like saying that this gives them their heart's desire, giving you the happy ending, you know, they don't want to shrug it off. Like, okay, it's cool that Superman can, with the help of his friends, fight it off. But you're telling me that his happy ending, his happy life is his father looking down on him with derision?
Well,
not
no,
because he's fighting his father's wishes, but like his dad is like basically leading a part of a cult, and his ideal world is his cousin getting beaten because of her last name, and it's just Superman in general for me is like, my take on the characters, I don't see why he would be so necessarily wistful towards Krypton or great Krypton, great Rao, like it, and that's all my take, right? Because to me, it's like if you didn't know where you came from, if you were born in this country, you wouldn't really know all this stuff. Like he could be curious, and I would understand that, but like for this to be his endgame is not my preferred interpretation. But I can see why pre-crisis it would be, but for this to be his ideal life doesn't ring true to me at all.
But see, this is where I think you're onto something, because I don't think you're wrong, because I think what Mongol underestimates is the true nature of Superman. And that's what makes this story, I think, brilliant, because he's lost, right? Like he thinks he's like, because what happens is, okay, we're going to spoil the hell of this comic, but people, I'm telling you, read it. It's fantastic. I love it.
Yeah, it's good.
35 years.
So,
almost
yeah.
40.
So here's the thing. When they put the thing on Mongol at the end, and he has everything, and you see that big smile on his face at the very end, the very last panel, how he's in, that's everything that Mongol said that Superman's going through. But that's not what Superman's going through. That's my point.
Yeah.
He's so good natured, he's resisting what his body, what his mind is trying to think, or what this poison thinks it wants from the psychological aspect. And he's resisting because of that's just who he is as a character. Whereas Mongol's so selfish, he's like, it's giving me everything, I'm happy. Yeah. Well, that's not Superman.
Yeah, but
and that's why I think it's brilliant.
But Batman, like his parents don't get killed, and he's married to Kathy Kane. So that doesn't.
But he's different. That's a different person. That's my. That's Batman.
He's Batman. Yeah, he's Batman.
But Batman has more bitterness than Superman, straight up. So let's be real.
If it's supposed to make him happy, why would this happier character be bitter in his life?
But that go ahead, Adam. Go ahead.
I think, because I'm thinking about it right now, and I think the interesting thing about this is basically, well, you know, the title of the story is For the Man Who Has Everything, and basically the Black Mercy in Superman's fantasy, it does give him everything, but it also shows that you can have your dream life, you can have what you think you want, but it's not all sunshine and roses. Like there's still like, oh yeah, like it's like, man, Superman's like, maybe like deep in his mind, he's thinking like, oh, I kind of, what would happen if Krypton didn't blow up and I got to actually, I got to live there, and my parents were alive and everything. And it's like, yeah, I want that. But then he gets it, and he gets his Kryptonian life, but it's just like there's just it goes off the rails, and it becomes basically like the modern world of Earth. It's not as idyllic as you would think it would be. Like, oh, I got everything I want, but there's still all of this, hatred and all these political problems and unrest and just all this junk that we deal with. So it wouldn't really be basically you think your ideal, you think this ideal is going to make you happy, and it doesn't. And I like actually what Paul is saying, that like, oh, his nature is that, maybe like his nature is actually twisting it to make him get out of it.
Yeah.
So
And there could be
That's
a part
what I
of it
think.
of them trying to extract the mercy from him.
it's
and
also that too, I would say.
That's
Like,
causing
Yeah,
the
I agree.
reality
Yeah.
to fracture a bit. But just like from the start of it, because it's fairly early on that it doesn't seem that idyllic. So, but I see where
Right,
you guys
which
are
I
coming
think-
from, and it's definitely a valid perspective for sure.
Chris,
Which you guys were
where do Chris, where do you stand on this issue? I've been waiting to hear what you think about this for a while.
I love this story.
Yeah.
Regarding the dream of Krypton itself, I don't necessarily see that as an attachment that Superman has to, and maybe this is colored by another post-crisis perspective on who Superman is, but I didn't necessarily see that as a devotion to Krypton as much as just an overriding desire that Clark has always had for belonging and for not being the other. And
yeah, what if I wasn't Superman, and what if I actually got to experience my roots?
sure, and I mean the roots I think are secondary to the sense of belonging, because in so many stories that I certainly derive a lot of value from, Superman wants to be human more than anything because it's his adopted world and it's his
Sure.
people. He sees humanity as his people, but he knows inherently that he is different, and there's nothing he can do about that. But what if he wasn't?
Yeah.
And I think that's what his mind is constructed a fantasy around. Regarding, I mean, we see the beginning of the story, he's already locked in Black Mercy. So when the dream takes the pretty hard right turn, literally and figuratively,
Yeah.
figuratively and
Philosoph-
philosophically, I should say.
Yeah.
I feel like that is Superman's will starting to creep in around the edges and to construct a scenario in which he could begin to break free. But it is only through the outside intervention of Batman and Robin that he is actually able to finally push through.
Sure.
But I mean the verbiage that Mongol describes for what it actually takes to disconnect himself willfully from the dream that Black Mercy constructed. That to me is what gets to the heart of who Superman is at his best, because Superman, like anybody, has a degree of self-interest, but unlike everybody, he is able and willing to push that aside or discard it entirely if it means ensuring that people are protected. And as soon as things start to become a little bit clearer, that's when he's able to actually punch through the fantasy. But the fantasy also falls apart in its vapidity precisely because the ideal nature of this dream, it is still a dream. and dreams don't necessarily need to be built on a supremely logical foundation to bring us happiness or joy or a sense of contentment. They're temporary.
Yeah,
The
they
senses of
end.
contentment are temporary, and they end. Absolutely. So the fact that he hastened its end, despite looking into the eyes of a child that he identified as his own, but still having the strength to say, I don't think you're real. It just gets me every time. On top of the fact that it's Dave Gibbons, just beautiful renderings completely all around from top to bottom, from beginning to end. Um, it's nice to see Jason Todd get something productive to do for a change. But I mean, that's kind of a cool moment for him in terms of the legacy of the second Robin. But this this is a story that, um, as much as Alan Moore can be so Alan Morey on things, he doesn't let the characters get ahead or he doesn't let his perspective get ahead of the characters in this instance, unlike for the man who has, or unlike whatever happened to the Man of Tomorrow. This to me feels like a purer, more truthful example of a Superman story, and I didn't take the conception of the dream being on Krypton as anything other than just like a personification of Superman's overriding desire to belong. Something that he has never really been able to do, despite the fact that he has, friendships, deep-rooted connections with other characters in the DC universe. Internally, he knows he's different, and it's Mongol's machinations that push that to the nth degree. I also have the benefit of having seen the Star Trek: The Next Generation episode "Future Imperfect" before I read this story. In that episode of TNG, Will Riker went through something very similar to what Superman did here. So this wasn't too far. I don't know for sure, but this issue might have inspired that episode to some degree, just because there are some things that rhyme quite a bit. But that was also an instance in which the fantasy started to fall apart once you looked closer at the details. And it was those details combined with really the ingenuity of Jason Todd that helped Superman push through at the end of the day. But the character work.
I have to head out.
Love it.
I have to head out. So before you guys cover the last issue, thanks for kind of carrying the load here. I love this issue a lot. I did like the Swamp Thing issue, just for the record. I did like this issue. It was more the concept I liked more. Yeah, it's very simple. I like the concept of it more than anything. Maybe it's just me, but I'm gonna do my grades for all of these the Superman comics stories. This was more of my pick, I would say. I will admit a little bit, but I'm gonna go ahead and say this. I would give a new reader friendly rating of 7.2. So if you're like, should I read this? I'd say, yeah, I think most new readers could read this. I think that's legit. My overall rating of all the 4 comics together, I'm going to give it 8.5. I think this is pretty good. I mean, again, the Swamp Thing series, this comic is simple. It's fun. It's fine. And the other 2 issues are solid enough. I like the legendary because they're Alan Moore and whatever, but that annual 11, man, I'm telling you, that's an all-timer for me. So anyway, yeah, thanks everyone who's come on. I'll listen to the last half later. I'm curious where you guys are on the Swamp Thing issue. So, but yeah, I will talk to you guys later. Bye.
Bye, Paul.
Bye.
Just to touch on what you were saying, Chris, like I do think there is like that poetry between the annual and whatever happened to the Man of Tomorrow, where you have basically like Kal-El's ideal life in his Black Mercy dream is no powers, has a family, has, kids, And where does he wind up in this story, but with no powers, and he has a son with Lois and more of a domestic home life, like he's done adventuring. So there is an interesting parallel between the two. And I haven't really heard them talk about it. And I have to wonder if on the show Superman and Lois, if their other twin is named Jordan, because in whatever
Oh, yeah.
happened, Clark's name, he changes his name to Jordan, and then they have a son, Jonathan, which, I mean, the Jonathan thing is obvious because of his human father, but this stuck out to me this time because it's the first time I've read it since I've watched that show. And it's like, oh, hey, look, there's a Jordan and Jonathan. I wonder if that's where the idea came from.
Wouldn't surprise me. It seems
and just
like
before we get, oh no, go ahead. Sorry, Chris.
No. I mean, we know why the name Jordan Elliott was chosen, but in terms of the selection of Jordan for that character in the show, definitely could have come from here. I don't see any reason why that wouldn't be the case.
One last note before we move on from the annual. Adam and Chris, did you guys watch the Justice League Unlimited adaptation of this that J.M. DeMatteis did?
Yes.
I didn't get around to it. I was going to, but
have you seen it before?
No.
Okay. Chris, what did you think of it?
Like
do you think
50 times? I love that episode. I feel like one of the things that episode gets so right is just sometimes in JLU, Superman can be taken for granted a little bit as a kid. I mean, and it's understandable why. There's a ton of characters in that show. I love the fact that for that episode, like ejecting Robin is not ideal, but understandable. But keeping it focused on the core Trinity, I think, was a good choice in the adaptive philosophy. But beyond that, this word, it takes on such different connotations compared to its original meaning, but it created or renewed rather a sense of Superman's awesome power in the truest sense of the word. Like why Superman is a being of such intense formidability that you do not want to piss this guy off. If you are someone who, if you're an innocent or if you're someone on the right side of the never ending battle, then he's going to be your best possible friend. He'll save you every time. But if you get on his wrong side, he is your absolutely worst nightmare. He can be where you're trying to escape in a blink. He can burn your face off just by looking at you. He can tear you in half with his pinky, and I feel like you get that sense. Not that that's something I need emphasized in every Superman story, but a reminder here and there, it doesn't go amiss. And the sheer sense of brutality that Superman exhibits when he becomes aware of the violation, like you get it in the original story, but there's something about getting it adapted in animation and seeing everything in motion, seeing his rage just unleashed against Mongol in those final moments. I adore that episode so much.
No, I think they did a brilliant job whittling down what was important and tying it all together. And I liked having Dana Delaney be the voice of his wife on Krypton. Like she's not playing a iteration of Lois, like it's a different character, but it was nice how they worked it all in. And given that show's mythology, how Brainiac even got woven in without detracting from anything in the very taut running time that it has.
Yeah, good commitment to DCAU canon, right? I mean, Brainiac was the internet on Krypton for Superman the Animated Series, so why not stick to it? No, I think that is like it's understandable why Alan Moore, at least according to DeMatteis and Dwayne McDuffie, God rest his soul, it's understandable why Alan Moore actually likes that episode.
Wait, what? JM is still alive.
No, Dwayne McDuffie is not.
Oh, I thought you were talking about DeMatteis. I'm like, no, he just wrote some comics. Like, please tell me something didn't happen.
Like it was like DeMatteis
Yeah,
via
Paul
McDuffie
McDuffie.
that
Yeah,
we learned that Alan Moore allegedly likes the episode. And I mean, his name is on it, which says a lot these days. But
yeah.
you know, it is an incredibly solid adaptation, and as a result, to me anyway, one of the best JLU episodes.
Agreed. It is one that I do revisit from that show a lot, and that's an excellent show. I actually prefer JLU to JL, but um, bringing things into the home stretch here, the last book, which Paul already touched on, we have this DC Comics Presents issue 85. This was the first time reading it for me. Adam, did you have any prior knowledge of this before tonight?
No, I had heard of it, but I hadn't read it or anything.
Earlier in the
There was a
episode,
show.
Chris, before you came on, we were giving our Alan Moore, our familiarity with some of his works. Have you read this prior to tonight?
Many times.
Okay. You're a Swamp Thing guy, aren't you?
Sort of. I mean, I wouldn't say
Yeah.
that like I'm a Swamp Thing primary fan or anything. I have the absolute editions of the Alan Moore run of Swamp Thing. This issue is included in there. But I came
Nice.
across this issue while I was a retailer. It was probably about 2007, roughly. We actually had it, and my manager at the time said, "You should read this. It's Alan Moore. He wrote Swamp Thing, but he writes Superman in here, and he didn't do that very much." And I read it there in the shop, and I bought it as soon as I finished it and brought it home. I think I bought it for 15 or 16 bucks, and I don't know what it goes for now, but and I was actually had the honor of being asked by our late friend John Beerley to contribute to his and Robert Reineke's conversation about this issue. They had a podcast called Swamp Things, where John had never read the run before, and Robert had, but he hadn't read it in a long time. So they went through issue by issue, and they had some of their friends do like read passages in character. So I got to read passages from this issue as Superman and as Swamp Thing for that episode, and contribute in a small way to their great conversation.
I'm gonna have to search that out now.
Ah, that would not surprise me, my friend. Good to see you here, Justin. Excellent, much appreciated. So, I have a lot of reverence for this story as a result.
Yeah, understandably so. Yeah.
Yeah.
This was my first time reading it, and just right from the start, man, just that cover had me immediately drawn into it. Like, that's just an awesome piece of artwork, and I can't imagine like how this would have popped off on the stand back in 85, I think, when this was published. So it definitely hasn't had the the impact that the other two stories had, but I'm 100% glad that it's in here, because I don't know if it would have caught my attention otherwise. And it's fairly, I don't know if it necessarily has something to say about it, but it's interesting to me that Moore is always humanizing Superman, but not
Right.
showing different like character aspects, but like depowering him and
Mhm.
then bringing out his vulnerability that way. And here
a good
basically
point.
he gets super sick. And I don't know. I thought it was a really interesting take, and how Superman doesn't even know, because he's so delirious, has like no idea how Swamp Thing is there helping him, or what Swamp Thing really is. And it's not tragic, but I don't know. I wish that he was more conscious of the fact that Swamp Thing was there, and
Mhm.
trying to do the right thing for him.
the thing that I find continuously fascinating about this is that Swamp Thing as a character, by his very nature, is extremely terrestrial, right?
Yeah.
And he is confronted with something that he is uniquely suited to address while also having, the wisdom, understanding, and reverence for something that is from another world, not just in the form of the infection that afflicts Superman in this issue, but for Superman himself. He has such an understanding of Superman's power level, the things that he is able to see and able to hear. He's extremely cautious in the way that he approaches. But granted, Swamp Thing is not as fragile as your average bear, so to speak. But still, he knows that look, this is a guy that could very easily end my existence if I don't approach this the right way. And he needs help. No one else can do it. I'm going to do the best that I can. This is actually an issue that I recommend to people often if they have never read a Swamp Thing story. My wife is a perfect example. She was, I think it was before the then DC Universe exclusive series was about to start. And she didn't really know what Swamp Thing's deal was. He'd been in a lot of memes over the years, and the original movie, not exactly the best representation of everything that he's about, or the TV show or the animated show. Like, Swamp Thing had his day, and then it seemed to pass. And so he's kind of in the ether of the public consciousness in comparison to a lot of other DC characters. So I put this in front of her, and she like immediately latched on to Swamp Thing as like an inherently compassionate being. And that's one of the things, like, even just looking at this page right now, it gets me because he's so concerned. He's so worried. He wants to help so much. And I just love that he has that dedication, recognition, care, compassion, and empathy to try and do what he can, because he knows what the consequences would be if he's not able to pull it off. It's something that someone that could crack the planet in half in a delirious state. And like, again, we're getting back to this idea of serving the power level of Superman, and that's not something, again, that I need to be reminded of every time. But there are instances where that does get lost in the mix, and recharacterizing it in a way like this through another character's eyes without necessarily having him crack things in half, I think is a really good way to emphasize what makes Superman an exceptional character on a physical level, but at the same time, it emphasizes the philosophical uniqueness and the compassion that Swamp Thing himself has at his best. So I love this story to death.
Any other thoughts on it, Adam? Adam seems like he froze. Uh-oh.
Did I freeze? Am I still here? Oh, there he is. We go. Blink back. Sorry, man. We lost you for a second.
Oh, yeah. It was kind of, everyone's screen was loading for me, but I could hear everything. Anyway, I liked the page where we're in Superman's dream, and we see, Clark and, well, I guess, who would this be? I guess we're in Kal-El's head, and we have Clark and Superman, trying to help him out, figure out like what to do or something. I don't know. I like that idea that, there are the two secret identities, and then there's the actual guy, the two public personas in different ways, and then
it's like a more meta version of Superman 3.
I guess. And yeah, Swamp Thing's cool. I like, like Chris was saying, his care for Superman, and his, I don't know, his I guess his humanity, even though he's a plant creature, is nice. It's a very I don't it's a very simple story, but um it's a nice little unconventional team up type deal.
Yeah.
So for you, Adam, how would you rank the 3 stories that were in this volume?
Hmm. It's a good question. I'd go with For the Man Who Has Everything first, and then I don't know. I'm not, I maybe probably would go Whatever Happened to the Man Tomorrow, and then the Swamp Thing story. But that could change. But definitely For the Man Who Has Everything is number one.
What about you, Chris?
Right here.
Look at that.
There it is. I was just typing it out when you asked me. Yeah, I mean, For the Man Who Has Everything has long held a place of high regard in my mind, and played no small role in my development as a Superman fan, with a perspective informed first by the source material outside of other media adaptations. Like, I began to appreciate, at a pretty critical stage, what that story could do and what it said about Superman's exceptionalism as a character, that always seemed like it wasn't emphasized enough in just my general conversations before I found my tribe, really, like, oh, I like Superman. Like, why do you like Superman? And this was a story when I became aware of it, I was just immediately taken with, because I could point to it and say, this is why I like Superman. Um, the Jungle Line, yes, it is comparatively simpler, but it also gives a lot of service to to the kinds of things that Superman can do and perceive, while also serving as a great character statement about who Swamp Thing is and what he's about. So on that basis, like, Superman's tearing him apart in parts of this story, and Swamp Thing is still just trying to calm him down and help him. And I just, like, there's so few characters that it seems you could practically do that with in a scenario like that. But Swamp Thing's one of them, and it's, on the outside it looks like kind of an odd pairing, but it makes so much sense when you read the issue. So I have a lot of reverence for it. For the Man Who Has Everything comes up as the caboose, not because of any outright derision or anything. It's just, I feel like it is outdone by the other two examples here. And it's not quite as true to my own conception of who Superman is and what he's about, but I still take value in it. I think that it, especially for its time, it's a very important Superman story that's just gave a glimpse at what we were about to see in terms of a pretty wide-ranging reinvention of him and his world. On that basis, I really appreciate it, but I do think it needs to be taken primarily as a product of its time, as opposed to a story that really stands as like a definitive universal Superman tale, if that makes sense.
So would you say this is like the Silver Age Superman story coming to an end?
I think that's certainly the mission statement.
Or would you say it's more a bronze?
I mean, it feels like, in terms of execution, it feels far more Bronze Age-ish than Silver Age-ish.
Yeah.
But practically speaking, it feels like Moore was primarily trying to wrap the Silver and Bronze Ages in a bit of a bow. That's kind of how I feel about it.
I think I'd have to agree with your rankings on it. It's just because the Jungle Line, or the Swamp Thing story, I'm so new to it, and I've only read it the one time. but there was a lot that I liked about it. But I mean, while I may have liked the story a little bit more, like it was more in line with my interpretation of or how my preferred take on the character, but you just can't beat the art on For the Man Who Has Everything. I mean, it's Dave Gibbons, and no disrespect to all the other artists who worked on the book. 'Cause I mean, like George Perez and Kurt Swan, but like Gibbons, like I first came to him from Green Lantern. So before I had ever read or knew what Watchmen was. And so his art is just kind of burned in my psyche, and just his composite, the way that Mongol like towers over the characters, and just some of his panel layouts, like it's not something that I'm that familiar with from this age of like Superman, and just like you feel the threat and you feel the menace. And for me, like that, the art just kind of elevates it above everything else. And while there's definitely story moments and character beats that I really like the whole everyone coming to celebrate his birthday and they're talking about what they got him, and you got to be careful. I don't want to say it because they'll hear, and which J.M. DeMatteis did a wonderful job like reinterpreting that for the animated show. While there's definitely a lot of classic elements that I like in the story, there's also like I mentioned before, just like some of what his ideal dream would be just doesn't ring true for what I like for the character. But it's not to say that it's necessarily bad, especially given looking at the context of the era that it came from. Like it makes sense. But it's just a lot of these stories felt really bitter to me, but I don't necessarily get that from the Swamp Thing one. So it's kind of like they're fighting for first place right now. And it's really my unfamiliarity with the Swamp Thing one, I think, that's keeping me from putting it to the top. But that's me. This wouldn't be the Superman book I give to someone who wants to get into the character. But obviously you guys like it a lot more than I do, and that's cool too. So
We'll get to
you guys. And yeah, I appreciated hearing everybody's thoughts on this, because it definitely gave me something to think about here. So next time I revisit it in 5 to 10 years, I'll definitely try and keep an open mind.
There you go.
So I think that's going to do it for us, though, for the night, unless you guys had anything else you wanted to talk about with these stories.
No, I think we kind of went around the world a little bit. I apologize for my tardiness, of course.
Oh, no, it's okay, man.
Much appreciated. Yeah, it is certainly worth reading. I mean, if you've never read these stories before,
oh yeah, for sure,
then Alan Moore, in what you could argue is his prime, on the beacon of superheroism itself, is absolutely worth absorbing. You might come away thinking each of these works is successively brilliant. You might come away thinking that they are maybe a little disappointing. But either way, I mean, there's an acumen here when you utter the man's name that is definitely on display. You see different facets of his strengths and weaknesses as a writer, but the difference here is that he was still okay with superheroes at this point. And seeing him actually invested in the kinds of stories that you could tell with these characters, there's a lot of value in absorbing them, certainly.
Well, Adam, where can people find you?
Enchilada Legs on the social media stuff, Spidey Dude Radio Network, here, Comic Binge. Yeah, that's basically it.
Damn straight here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Captain Clow, what about you?
CHRISCLOW on various internets, formats, platforms. We are planning on reconvening Discovery Debrief Star Trek podcast reasonably soon to discuss a couple of different things. One of which is the impending return of Star Trek Lower Decks later this month. But also, one of our panelists has taken the long road getting from there to here for the very first time, and we might have to explore our dear panelist Ty Monaghan's journey into the beginning of Earth Starfleet history, because he has started Enterprise. It's a funny story. He and our other co-host Cicero Holmes were at a convention recently. Ty was in a photo op with several different Star Trek cast members, one of whom was Connor Trenier, who
Nice.
was chief engineer on Star Trek Enterprise. And Ty didn't know who he was and felt bad about that. So he decided to start watching Enterprise, and apparently has fallen in love with the show.
Wasn't Ty watching the original series?
He's kind of dipping in
and out. Okay.
TOS does not seem to be his forte. He's not as engaged. Like, he started watching TOS, and then I think he and his wife decided to jump to DS9 and just ravenously consumed all of DS9. And now this is another blind spot that they're clearing up, and it seems like he's having fun with it. So we'll probably have to talk about that on the show at some point. And then, of course, right here at the Comic Binge, our next episode of Knights Never Die, Grant Morrison's Batman issue by issue, will talk about Batman number 664, which is the beginning of a slight detour in the run, a little bit. Doesn't have as much overall importance to the overarching narrative, but there's still certainly a lot of depth to be explored there, and all leading up to the next probably big milestone issue, I guess, would be 666. So that'll be coming sooner rather than later. So stay tuned to Comic Binge social media channels for dates on the next episode of Knights Never Die.
I feel like now that we've gotten over the clown laughs at midnight or the clown dies at midnight, the name I can't remember right now.
The clown at midnight. Just the
clown at midnight that I can't remember at 11:45 at night. Once we get past that story, like, now it's full steam ahead. So
yeah, kind of. Yeah.
You know, and it's just going to get crazier and weirder and more exciting from here on out. More trippy for sure.
We are in the fast lane to purgatory. That's what we're going to do. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm excited for us to get to those episodes, and our next Superman story that we get to in a couple weeks. And as for me, I've got The Flash up to speed with Wally West. Hopefully I can find some time to edit tomorrow and get an episode out. BatmanOnFilm.com. I had 2 reviews go live today. The All-In Catwoman number 69 just dropped today. That was a great issue. The new creative team, new direction. And Batman and Robin Year 1 by Mark Waid and Chris Samney, reunited from Daredevil. And
can't wait for that book.
That's already on DC Universe Infinite Ultra. Whatever the top tier is, it's not a month later. It came out today on the shelves, and it's up there on their site today. So if you've got that service and haven't been able to make the shop, definitely worth checking that out. It's a fun book. If you miss classic Batman, if you miss Alfred, Batman and Robin, Commissioner Gordon, then that is a book you definitely need to put on your pull list. Completely different from Absolute Batman, but it's all Batman. It's all good. So another solid book there. And then I just started a new James Bond podcast, the 007 Files, with my editor at the JamesBondDossier.com and the editor of the Spy Command. So that's going to come out fairly regularly, just talking about all things James Bond while we twiddle our thumbs for development of the 26th movie in the franchise. So,
and Project 007 from Ireland.
And Project 007. When there actually becomes news on that, we will definitely talk about it, and I'll have to get you on, Chris, because I'd love to hear your perspective on that. Sure. But I don't have anything else. Chris, if you would do the honors to close us out.
Read more comics.
read more Superman comics too.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks for watching, everybody.